AKOS, everyone. I'm your host, David Ritchey, and this is the first ever episode of AKOS. And it's going to be a fast one because this is to tell you what AKOS is all about. If you are someone that I told about it, which is probably the only way you're ever going to listen to it, because I have no idea how you're going to find it, well, I'm going to kind of tell you what we're doing here at AKOS Podcast. Okay, so like I said, my name is David Ritchey, and I've been a podcast fan since 2009. I stumbled across, I'm a horror movie junkie, and in 2009 I stumbled across a podcast, first ever podcast. I didn't know what a podcast was. I was late to the smartphone game. I have no idea which smartphone was out in 2009 or if a smartphone was out in 2009. So take yourself back to an iPod Shuffle, and I went on a trip and somehow stumbled across in 2009 a Friday the 13th podcast. It was by somebody called Now Playing Presents. I say by somebody, Now Playing Presents. Now Playing Presents is somebody I still listen to this day. But it was a movie review podcast. And in 2009, when I went on this trip, somehow I stumbled across them reviewing every Friday the 13th. Of course, in 2009, the Friday the 13th reboot was coming out. So that's why they were doing it. It was like a countdown to the reboot. And then after they reviewed, each episode was dedicated to one of the Friday 13th, and then at the end of it, they ranked them all. So that was my introduction to podcasts, and that's not like, it didn't start a fire of me searching for podcasts, because again, if you took a smartphone out of your hand, I couldn't tell you what kind of phone I was using in 2009, but it was either a flip phone or something similar. It had the game Snake on it if it had any games at all. But you couldn't just do what you can do today. So I don't remember how I found Now Playing Presents podcast, but I sure didn't come home and start looking for a whole bunch of other podcasts. But I did stick with Now Playing Presents. And my phone today, I could pull it out of my pocket right now, and you will find not only the newer episodes of Now Playing Presents, but you would still find the Friday the 13th retrospective, because I keep it on there. There's something about, we all have that when we find something, that one thing that we just love that kind of takes us back to why we like something. So I keep it on there. And about once every 2 or 3 years, I'll run through. And they started off with pretty short episodes. And, of course, now if you get on there, their episodes are typically about 1.5 hours to 2 hours. And they've done every franchise under the sun. They went from Friday the 13th. And I don't know if they did it before or after, because, like I said, I stumbled across them. But then I made sure I listened to their Halloween retrospective, their Nightmare on Elm Street retrospective. They've done all the Marvel movies. They've done all the James Bond movies. Everything they've done, I've stuck with them and I've listened to. And so over the last, probably, that was in 2009, about whenever I did finally get an iPhone, I did eventually start listening to podcasts. And again, today it's a lot easier to find them. I don't even remember how we got music on our iPods. Didn't we have to plug them into a computer, download music or stuff to the computer, then put all that stuff from computer to your iPod? That was quite a process we used to have to go to. And I remember having to find the music. I'm sure there's some people out there that remember Napster. I never used Napster, FBI. Yes, I did. No, I didn't. And then there was also, I remember, it doesn't feel like that long ago, I used to find YouTube videos of songs and then take the audio, convert it to a whatever, MP3 or whatever, move it to your iTunes, make your playlist in your iTunes, put the playlist onto your iPod. Man, have times changed. It's like I always tell my sons, that they will, I'm not going to say they'll regret it, because you don't regret things you've never experienced, but the fact that they might not ever experience going into a video store on a Friday after school and spending 30 minutes to an hour looking at all of the VHS boxes on the shelf to decide which ones they wanted to take home that weekend is, it's a crying shame. That is hands down one of the best experiences of my childhood. Well, I don't feel quite the same about moving music from the internet or the World Wide Web to my whatever phone I was using. That was a process I don't think I'm going to miss ever. So anyway, as I started being able to find more podcasts, I stuck in that same category. I was always looking for other people that reviewed the movies that I loved, which, again, I love all movies, but I'm a scary movie junkie. And so since then, I have come across Halloweenies. which they have done. They just finished the Scream franchise with the most recent Scream 2022 coming out, but they started, obviously, I'm sure you can tell by the name. I believe they have a Stephen King Losers Club podcast. I have never listened to it, but they decided, I think, one year to do the Halloween franchise. And I believe, just like with the 2009 Friday the 13th, that accumulated with the Friday the 13th reboot. I believe they did their Halloween franchise retrospective to end when 2018's Halloween reboot came out. They called it Halloween because of the director. And then, of course, a couple years later, they came back and added Halloween Kills to it. But I think they planned to just do that one year, but it was such a hit. I think the next year they went ahead and knocked out Nightmare on Elm Street, and then the next year they knocked out Friday the 13th. And then they just did Scream. I believe they're about to do an Evil Dead retrospective next year. And they do it the whole year. Like, whatever they pick lasts the whole year. So, like with Scream, there's not enough Scream movies to go a whole year. So they found ways to work in, like, Randy's picks and stuff like that. So Halloweenies was one. I found a couple other Friday the 13th ones I listened to. I listened to a lot that are like mine, that are not as professionally made. This would be as amateur can be. But then I kind of shifted towards, you obviously are going to listen to podcasts about things that you are interested in. And my top two things that make me happy are movies, specifically horror movies, and football, specifically Florida State Seminole football. And so I really got heavy into that, especially over the last year. I found things called the No Cast, Wake Up War Chant, Built for Playmakers, just all kinds of stuff about Florida State football. And so I'm sitting there one day thinking, we're all going to be dead soon. I'm 48 years old. I figured that I am, at least if this was the mile relay, if I have not handed off to the third leg, I am about to. I'm at least finishing up the second leg, about to hand off to the third leg. And why not do one? Because let's be real, who cares if anybody ever listens to it? I've gone 48 years without making money off a podcast. I don't plan on starting now, so I just decided this year to do it for fun. So one of the podcasts I listen to is Built for Playmakers, and it sounds like a really cool guy, as we all do. We all sound like really nice people, right? And his name was Kelvin Hunt, so I just reached out to him and started kind of visiting with him briefly about what mics he used and what all this stuff and that stuff. And so, I put together a little homemade, very amateur system right here, and decided this year my goal is going to be to start a podcast. Then the next thing came to, well, what am I going to talk about? Because I start, just like I do everything, and just like you guys probably do, when you're going to start something, you don't know what to do, you YouTube it or Google it. That's what I do with everything. My parents, they still use flip phones. They do have internet, but they'll ask me a lot of questions, a lot of technology questions, or questions about anything. If I don't know it, I Google it or I YouTube it. So I start Googling and YouTubing how to make a podcast. And of course, there's a lot of stuff, just like anything, that you don't think about. But I have me a little setup here, and that's what we're rolling with. But I had to pick a topic. According to everybody, you got to pick a topic. You got to find a niche, because you want people to want to listen to you. But I had a problem with that, because I didn't want to pick just one topic. And so my plan was to make one podcast called AKOS, and I came up with that in the middle of the night one night, that stands for all kinds of stuff. My plan was to just talk a little bit about everything, but that doesn't necessarily work that great, because it's not going to be possible for people to find it. So one of the things I discovered about podcasting is, if you ever wanted to get it out anywhere, you got to have a host, okay? And so just like I did with everything else, I started Googling and watching videos over the best podcasting host, because you can't, or I don't know how to get it out to Apple Podcasts, to Spotify, to all those places without it. And so I'm looking at hosts, and of course I'm originally going to try the free one, but I started reading about it, and it sounds like there are several that are not that expensive, that might do a little bit more, might make things a little easier. So I start kind of moving in that direction. But one of the things that I wanted to do was talk about all kinds of stuff. And a lot of the hosts I found, you could buy a plan that helped you get your podcast pushed out, but you had to buy another plan for another podcast and another plan for another podcast. And by that point, I had kind of realized if I'm going to talk about all kinds of stuff, there ain't going to be a way for anybody to find me if they're interested. Let's say I'm talking about sports, but they're interested in movies. They're never going to find me. So I decided to make several podcasts, all called AKOS. And I am at 3. So I found me a podcast host, and I would think you say it's Spreaker. It's spelled Spreaker, that you can host unlimited podcasts. Now, it's about the same amount of money, so I thought, well, this one fits me pretty good. So I've got 3 AKOS podcasts, and this is going to be the intro on all 3 of them. So if you have stumbled across this new AKOS podcast, but you've listened to one of the other AKOS podcasts, you can immediately skip this episode and go to the next one. So the 3 things I'm talking about, I got 3 podcasts right now. AKOS Movie Night, which we're going to review movies. AKOS SMF, which stands for sports, mostly football. And we'll talk about all sports. We'll talk about mostly football. And within football, we're going to talk a lot about Florida State, but I didn't want to limit it just to Florida State. And then we got AKOS Dad Academy, because I'm a divorced dad of 2 amazing boys, and I kind of want to talk about some of the things that I go through, that we all go through. Not just a divorced dad, but any divorced parent or any parent, period. And so I made one podcast for each of those topics, and I put them all out there, and I'm going to put this as the episode 1 on all 3, and then they'll kind of all go their own direction. So now that I've kind of tried it a little bit, these are the 3 ones I started with. The very first one I recorded was Dad Academy, coaching my own kid, because I'm coaching my youngest 11-year-old son, Logan, in Pee Wee basketball. So that one talks a little bit about that. And then I came back a couple weeks after that, and I did my first movie night podcast, AKOS Movie Night, Lord of the Rings retrospective, because me and Hayden and Logan, so I have 2 sons, 13-year-old Hayden, 11-year-old Logan. We spent 3 weekends going to the Alamo Drafthouse in Lubbock, watching the Lord of the Rings extended editions each week. So once they were all done, I did a little movie night review podcast with Hayden and Logan, reviewing Lord of the Rings. And then yesterday I was like, hey, let's knock out one more with the other AKOS SMF, Sports Mostly Football. So we went over the 2022 Florida State football schedule. So right now, those are the 3 AKOS family podcasts that I'm going to put out there. I have yet to publish any of them at this point. I plan on trying to do that tomorrow night. I don't really know how that's going to look. According to Spreaker's website, it is super easy, and it just automatically will push it out to all of the podcast places. Nothing's that easy, and we all know that. But I do hope soon, within the next 24 to 72 hours, that I do figure out how to push these 3 podcasts out to all of the major spots people listen to podcasts. And that's how we got here. There's music on the beginning and end of all of them, and there's a little intro and outro on the beginning and end of all of them. I don't know if that's good or bad. The music was done by my son Hayden. I have been completely off social media for over a year now, but I did make a Twitter account for this called AKOS, @AKOS Podcast, and that's at capital A, capital K, capital O, capital S, capital P, and then the odd cast is little letters, capital AKOS, at AKOS Podcast. It obviously has 0 followers because I've just created it and nobody knows about it. But, in a perfect world, there's some other dads or parents out there that want to, maybe they have some good topics to discuss on Dad Academy. Maybe there's some other Florida State fans, because, guys, there's a lot of people that know more about Florida State football than I do. Maybe they want to, reach out and ask some questions about that or correct me on that. And the movie night ones are just really where I want to hang my hat, because that's how I got into wanting to do this podcasting. And I'll also say, if it works out perfectly, the movie night one, I'll always have a host. I've only hosted my boys, Hayden and Logan, and they were sitting right next to me with my one microphone, and we were moving it back and forth. But I got some friends here in town that love movies as much as I do, and I would love to have them on the Movie Night podcast. So my hope is that each AKOS gets 1 episode per month. There's a Dad Academy per month, there's a Movie Night per month, and there is an SMF episode every month. We will focus mostly on the Movie Night podcast on scary movies, because that's what makes the world turn round. I would really like at some point to try to track down people across the world that have never seen certain movies and watch them and then get those people on there to be my guests. In other words, if there are people in this earth that have never watched the Friday the 13th franchise, first off, I'm sorry, your life is incomplete. But secondly, I think that would be pretty cool to have them as the guest reviewer as we go through. And I do plan to do that, go through whole franchises. So when I push this out, I don't know how it's going to look on Apple or I don't have Spotify. I used to, but I everything I look at is on Apple. And in my head, I'm thinking you can just type in AKOS and all of them will pop up. So if you just love the sound of my voice, you can listen to all of them. But let's say you just want to listen to the movie night ones, you can just subscribe to AKOS Movie Night. If you're a big Florida State fan or football fan or sports fan, as I am, especially college football, you can subscribe to AKOS SMF. If you're a dad or a mom that just likes to hear other people's experiences when it comes to raising their kids, you can subscribe to AKOS Dad Academy. That's my thought. That's my big process. I mean, that's how I think this will go, but who really knows? All right, guys, so welcome. They're amateur because I'm an amateur. And there's a disclaimer with everything. I am not an expert on anything. I just like stuff. And so if you're listening to this podcast and you think it could sound better, well, you're probably right. When you hear us talk about Lord of the Rings, you're going to think to yourself, if you're a massive fan, well, they don't know everything about it. And you know what? You're probably right. If you live in Tallahassee, Florida, and have had season tickets to Florida State football your entire life, guess what? You're going to know more than me. That's all right. That's what the world we live in is. I tell my sons, we're living in the best age of creativity that we've ever lived in. My oldest son, Hayden, is extremely, what would be the word? He's extremely musical, but he's also really good with computers. And if you guys will go back, I grew up mostly as a kid in the 80s and early 90s. If you wanted to, let's say, make a video game, that still sounded like a very far-fetched dream. Like there would have to be some privilege that I was not privy to, and a lot of money and computers and things that didn't necessarily just exist in every living room across America. But that is not the case anymore. If you have a computer and internet, you can almost do anything you want to do. And that's what I tell my son all the time. The constraints that kept a lot of us from just doing don't exist anymore. And so I'm applying that to myself. I got a computer. I bought a mic. I had no clue what a pop filter was, but I have one now. And so I'm going to do a podcast. I'm going to do several. And I don't want to focus on just one thing. So we're going to focus on all kinds of stuff. So to any listener that ever stumbles across this, welcome to AKOS. Thank you for listening. I am your host and will be your host as we travel these little journeys together. Thank you for listening. Have a great time.